Well, that's pretty exciting. First of all, I always forget to tell people who I am. I'm Louisa Kasdon, and I'm the founder of Let's Talk About Food. And I am very excited to be here tonight. But first, I want to welcome on behalf of WBUR and City Space, who are our hosts, so I want us all to be respectful and applaud. If you like what you see here tonight, check out the full lineup of events on City Space. It's right on the WBUR website, and every night seems to be something fun. Sign up for the monthly newsletter at wbur.org/cityspace. And now let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing here tonight. Why are we doing this? Well, about a decade ago, well, it starts a little bit before a decade ago, I discovered maybe 20 years ago that there was a reason why people always talked to me when I was sitting on a bench or next to them on the plane and whatever people would always talk to me. And I realized that I was the kind of person who liked collecting other people's stories. So about a decade ago, when we began Let's Talk About Food over on the other side of the Charles River, we started recording people's food stories at our events. And we were truly blown away by how eagerly and easily total strangers told us amazing, moving, funny stories about food, how food was at the center of so many human experiences. Everybody has a food story. And since then, we've recorded hundreds of first-person stories. We've recorded them at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. We've recorded them at oyster festivals. We've recorded them at supermarkets, at festivals, at concerts, and it's just been, for me, an incredible joy to hear the huge range of people's food stories. So when I started to think about what I really wanted to do, I realized I wanted to bring everybody into that wondrous experience I have when people share their food stories, because when someone shares their food story, a little part of it is always yours. Talking about food just unlocks a natural reserve in people, and I think you'll see that tonight. Food is so much more than the calories and the vitamins and the fibers and everything else. It's the stuff of human connection. And our goal is to create a regularly occurring podcast. Tonight we've invited the A-Team, all people who have made their lives in a professional way around food. I'm going to tell you who they are in just a second. But following that, we're going to be asking you, the members of the audience, to submit your own stories to us. Submit your pitches on our website. That'll be instructions. And at a future event, you'll be standing up here instead of me blathering away, which will be pretty relief for all of us, I think. Tonight, the hugely talented people we have are, and I'm just going to say them in the order that they'll be speaking, are Steve DiFilippo, who's the founder of Davio's Restaurants. Now opening his 11th Davio's, I think, right as we, 12th Davio's at the Seaport as we speak. Following Steve is going to be Catherine D'Amato, who is the president of the Greater Boston Food Bank. That's a well-deserved applause. Following Catherine will be Jasper White. Jasper White, we consider him the icon of all that is New England food, and he's just an incredible person. More about him later. And following Jasper will be Celeste Croxton Hicks, whom I met last year, and she is a local caterer, and she's a pretty amazing person. You will hear from her. Then we're going to take a little break. Everybody's going to recover from the magnificence of what they've just heard, and we will return with a story from a surprise guest. The surprise guest, quite honestly, turns out to be me, which is not so exciting, because last night our wonderful novelist, and we're a huge fan of hers, Anne Hood, had a death in her family, and turns out I had a story I wanted to share. Following me will be Charles Draghi, the chef of Erbaluce and many other restaurants. Thank you. And to wrap it all up and to bring us to our knees in a metaphorical way will be Chef Lydia Shire. So I want to introduce, to begin with, Steve DiFilippo. And let me say a little bit about Steve. Steve grew up eating, I've known Steve since he was about 9, I think, when he first opened the first Davio's on Newbury Street. And he seemed awfully cute then. He really did. But he grew up eating authentic Italian food at home on the North Shore in Linfield. His book, It's All About the Guest, is a love story about food. He has a 34-year history of Davio's on Newbury Street, and when he bought it, he was 24. So he was a kid when I met him, he really was. The newest location is at Boston's Logan Airport. He's done a million different things. He has restaurants all across the country now. And he's been, in addition to all of the work that he does in restaurants, which he seems to be doing effortlessly, because no matter when you email him or send him any kind of a social media thing, he's back at you in 9 seconds. So I really don't know. I think the man doesn't sleep. He's also actively involved in the Taste of the NFL, the Greater Boston Food Bank, Best Buddies Build Inc., and in 2008, Steve was inducted into the Massachusetts Restaurant Hall of Fame, and in 2014, he was the Restaurateur of the Year. His accolades go on, but he's going to share with us a story tonight. I believe it's about learning to make chicken stock. So I'm going to ask Steve to come up. But first, I am the worst person in the world to tell a secret to.
Oh, okay. We had an agreement.
No, I broke it. I broke it before you told me it was a secret. So today is also Steve's birthday. So I am going to ask Sean Leonard to come to the stage. We have a little bit of a surprise for Steve. And I'm going to ask everybody to join me. You didn't tell me it was a secret until after I told Sean. Day to you. Happy birthday to you.
Steve.
Happy birthday, dear Steve.
This is crazy. Thank you.
And you'll all get a chance to share at the intermission. Steve, take it away.
Can I take this thing off? Okay. First of all, that's the cooking school that I went to, Cambridge Culinary School. Roberta Dowling was the founder, and she's unfortunately not with us anymore. I miss her a lot. She was amazing. But anyway, I did go to BU, and right here, this was my school right here. I got my diploma right up there. It used to be an old thing, an armory. Now it's like a big stadium or something. But I got to tell you, if you told me when I first started that I would be sharing a stage with the Jasper White and Lydia Shire, I would think you're out of your mind, okay? Because these two here, I wouldn't be standing here without these two who set the, first of all, she's still doing it. He retired, but she's still working. And, they've been so great to me all these years. And, I was always the young guy coming up, and I'm still the young guy, even though it's my birthday. I'll never forget, I met Lydia on a plane going down to that first Super Bowl. Do you remember in 1986? We don't want to talk about that game. It wasn't a good ending. Tom Brady, I think, wasn't even born then, so I don't know what happened. But anyway, thanks for coming tonight. We love doing these things. Obviously Louisa has done so much for our city as well. We're so fortunate to have her. And of course, we have the most philanthropic woman in the world right here. You'll be hearing from her later with the Boston Food Bank. So anyway, I thought I would tell a story about, because people ask me all the time, Steve, how did you get started in this thing? How did it all happen? And growing up with an Italian grandmother, my dad's mom, but I had a Portuguese mother. Okay, my mother is from the Azores, and people always think because I'm DiFilippo, I'm 100% Italian. I'm actually only half Italian, and my kids are like a quarter Italian. Their names are DiFilippo, but they're not really that Italian. So anyway, my mother, She learned everything from how to cook from my Italian grandmother and Julia Child, because that's what we used to do. When I was a kid, I was big in sports, but nobody knew that I used to work in the kitchen with my mom. It was kind of like a secret, because back in the early 70s, I'm not sure if many of you remember that, but I'm joking because you all do. Don't flatter yourself. So she, it wasn't a manly thing to do. I don't know how to describe it, but there was no, right, Jasper? Do you remember? There was no Emerald on TV. It was all like Julia. It was So I never really told people that I cooked with my mom. So, and when I was about 14, 15, she used to teach me. I used to work with her in the kitchen, and we would make, the Italian American things that my dad wanted, because he's from Providence, and nothing against Providence, but after Tony's Colonial and Venda Ravioli, I don't know what else is there, but anyway, so she would make chicken parm and the meatballs and all the stuffed peppers, all the things that we would make and we would eat. Right? That's what we did. We'd make the stuff Saturday or Sunday morning. I was great at frying the eggplant. That smell, that eggplant. Oh. So that was what I did, right? I would cook and eat. Well, then my mother and father used to go away a lot on weekends, and I became the cook because my older sister, she was about 5 years older than me, and let's say I'm 13, 14. She's 18, 17. The last thing she wanted to do was cook. She was thinking about, let's face it, boys at that time. And, and my brother really wasn't cooking, so I was the cook, right? So I would, open up the freezer or the refrigerator, and I would make dinner. That's what my job was, And this was the time, my mom was like kind of early 40s, mid 40s, and she was acting a little different. At the time, I really don't know how to explain it, but she was hot all the time. In the middle of the winter, and she was extremely moody. I never knew what she was gonna do, I honestly thought she was crazy, and she wasn't, but I'm not even sure today what was wrong with her, women, I'm married, I understand, but I just didn't really know what was happening with her. So she goes away, and I open up the refrigerator, and I'm looking to make something, right? So I take out this chicken. Okay, just stuff in the, this is back in the early 70s. My mother would buy a whole chicken, and, she would, there'd be the bones in there, so I'd open it up, and it was just all bones. It was like no chicken, and I didn't really understand it. So I open it up, and I'm, I want to make chicken, but there's really no chicken, it's just bones, So I'm thinking, she's friggin' lost it. She's like, freezing bones, So she comes home, Sunday night, and I said, okay, that's it. Because my dad didn't really want to talk about it. He said I would never understand. It was beyond understanding. He said someday I would understand what was wrong with my mother. And we never really had to talk. They were old. They're old school. They didn't really tell you stuff. So I grabbed her and I said, Mom, we need to talk. Okay. Last night I wanted to make dinner, and I took out this whole thing of, it wasn't really meat. It was like all bones. And, I have to say, Mom, you haven't been right lately. You're always hot. You got the windows open in the middle of the winter. You're moody. I don't know what's wrong with you, Mom, but, now you're freezing garbage. What are you doing, And she laughs. She goes, you think I'm, just, let me show you how you make chicken stock. And I was like, chicken stock? What are you talking about? She goes, that kale soup that I make? Because that's like the one Portuguese thing she'd make was kale soup. Because my dad really didn't like Portuguese food. We had to have the Italian food. So she literally takes out an onion, and she takes out celery, right? And she takes the bones, and she puts them in an oven. She roasts them. She starts teaching me how to make chicken stock. And I'm like, what the hell? What are you talking? I didn't understand it. Because up till then, whatever we made, we ate. Right? That was it. You'd make the chicken parm or the meatballs, and you ate that. This was for something later, right? Chicken stock, that was the base of her soups, okay? And I tell this story because it really changed my life. Because I thought, wow, this cooking thing is cool. You actually make something that you use in something else. Right? The meatballs, you don't make it for something else. You eat the friggin' things, right? So this was revolutionary. I got so excited about cooking it, and then I met Roberta, and I went, obviously I went to BU, but my whole life was about food from then on. I think I gained 15 pounds. That's all I did was eat. And it really changed everything. And the chemistry of food to me is what I would call it. And then she started teaching me a lot of other stuff, because then my mom went to Madeline Kamen's cooking school, and that's where she met Roberta. That's really changed my whole life, and I got so behind all of that. And then Roberta catered my sister's wedding. It's just crazy how this chicken stock thing really changed everything, because I really started paying attention. And that's it. That's my story. What do you think? That's it. So All right, thanks. So come on up. You going to talk now? Or? Okay, well, come on up. Well, there's only one microphone, so...
I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to wish you a happy birthday, and I'm going to invite our next storyteller up to the stage.
Great,
It's Catherine D'Amato. Catherine D'Amato is my personal hero. Heroin? Remember we used to call it heroin until that became a drug? But Catherine is the president and CEO of the Greater Boston Food Bank. She will share her story about growing up in an immigrant family where she became the third generation to work in the food industry. It was her parents who taught her the significance of food and the dignity that goes with it. But I want to say something else. Catherine once told me a story about being at her home in outside of San Francisco, and just the lines of people who would come to her at the back of her parents' door. I think they had a little restaurant there, and just in need of food. And there was always food that was provided. So she was destined to be a food banker. So Catherine, come and talk to us about how a small impression can become your whole career.
Thank you, Lisa. What would you like? You would like to use it on the mic stand?
And I'm supposed to tell you that the clock is there.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Okay. Thank you. Hi, everybody. So what I wanted to share with you is sort of my journey to be a food banker and how a small impression from my parents actually turned into a career. So I grew up in Northern California. My grandparents were farmers that immigrated to the United States, and my father worked for Continental Baking Company, also known as Blue Seal Bread in California. So he was literally a bread man. He drove a bread truck. And then when I was 8 years old, my parents decided to try to improve our lives, and I'm the youngest of four. So they opened a restaurant called D'Amato's Restaurant in Northern California. And when I moved here, people are like, "Are you related to Joe D'Amato?" And I'm like, "Yeah, somewhere. There's a Joe in every Italian family, but no, I have one back in California." But so what this lesson taught me, or this opportunity in the restaurant, which was when I would go to Colorado, which was where my grandparents' farm was, my grandfather would tell us that we had to use every bit of the pig but the squeal. So that was also destiny, to be a food banker, relative to use everything, grab everything, recycle everything. And when Steve was talking about chicken stock, I make all my own stocks. And it freaks people out when they come to my house. It's like a freezer full of fish stock, beef stock, chicken stock, etc., vegetable stock. But I am a country cook. I am in awe of our chefs. I could never be a chef because the meal is never the same. You will never eat the same soup twice in my house, but you will eat something wonderful. And that's why we have chefs. So back to the restaurant. My parents opened this restaurant, and as Louisa noted, we were taught that if anyone should come to the back door seeking food in exchange for work, that we were to bring them in, sit them down, and feed them. I'm 8 years old. That's a very powerful message, but it also accompanied the fact that my father was Italian and a Roman Catholic, which was if a nun or priest came through the front door, and at that time you would know they were nuns or priests because they wore clerical garb, not necessarily today. They were also folks that were fed for nothing. We were taught to pick up the check and just say management had that. So at 8 years old, I'm trying to figure out what these two have in common. And not till much later, when I went to study theology and philosophy, did I figure it out. Why would a nun and priest get free food and a beggar get free food as well? So that beginning of justice, and as Louisa noted, that was a very powerful piece for me. So I will share with you that I never, ever said, I want to be a food banker. There's no degree in it. You can't go any place to study it. You come to it in a very different way. I wanted to be a singer. and a songwriter. And I have published albums, and I do like to sing, so I was in there with the birthday song. It was all good. But I couldn't make a living at it. And so my passion in music, it remains, but it was converted to how do we help people who simply just need to eat? And often for no fault of their own, they find themselves in a situation. And so that combination for me became very powerful in studying theology. And I was able to, through the grace of many great mentors, for me, start the San Francisco Food Bank in 1979. And one thing led to another, led to another, and in such learned about this connectivity, that there are people who need food, and there's food. And how do you create that connectivity? So the food bank is not a pantry. We supply pantries. So we are a supplier, like a food wholesaler. And that's where I think of myself as that third generation. Grandparents, farmers. I learned a lot about soil. I know a lot about dirt, or never to call it dirt, actually. But what soil means and the protection of soil. I proudly can say to you, we created the first food bank farm in America in Hadley, Massachusetts in 1991. So why? Because Hadley, Massachusetts has the third most important loam in the world. Not in the United States, not in Massachusetts, in the world. It's a highly productive soil. Grandparents taught me a lot. And then my father, who's a bread man, wants to better the life for his family and moves us from working class to middle class. And education is a most important thing. So don't forget that. And then I want to be a singer and somehow become a food banker. So the lesson for me in sharing with you that story tonight is that we all have something we can do. You can write a check, you can volunteer, you can share your skill, you can change somebody's life. And what I say to my team each and every day, because we put out enough food now for about nearly 60 million meals, so 70 million pounds just in Boston for the Greater Boston Food Bank, is when we don't do our job, people don't eat. It's really simple, and I think that chefs can share that same philosophy. When you do your job, people eat and they have an awesome meal. In my work, it's a lot about how people can thrive and survive and take care of their family. So go back to the lesson, that 8-year-old that tries to see the connectivity of why my parents would say, this person deserves to eat because they are hungry, not because they have to work in order to have the food. So never underestimate, as parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, the influence you may have on that child that's near you because they're listening and they're watching. And for me, it became a career. Thank you.
I always say to Catherine that if she hadn't gone into food banking, she'd be running General Motors. I next want to welcome Jasper White. Jasper White in the middle of Boston needs no introduction, but he's going to get one anyhow. Jasper White spent much of his childhood on a farm near the Jersey Shore. He credits his love of good food to his Italian grandmother. And I have to tell you, never underestimate the power of grandmothers. I spent a long career as the food editor for the Boston Phoenix, and so many chefs talk to me about their grandmothers. It's kind of incredible. Jasper began his cooking career in 1973. Many of us were alive in 1973. And before settling in Boston, he worked in New York, Florida, California, Washington State, and Montana. And 1983, Jasper's restaurant opened on Boston's historic waterfront. It was the first restaurant named after a chef. We called it eponymous. Both the chef and the restaurant received numerous awards and were featured extensively in national and local media. And in 1990, Jasper was given the James Beard Award for the best chef in the Northeast. And after 12 years of being Boston's one of the premier restaurant destinations, Jasper decided he'd had enough. He closed his restaurant. He took time to write 3 cookbooks. All of his books did well. They all got critical acclaim. And in 2000, Jasper surprised everybody by opening not a fine dining restaurant, but the fabulous Summer Shack. Summer Shack was incredibly successful, as you all know. From its inception, it got enthusiastic reviews and happy crowds, and opened up in casinos and here and there. It's incredibly successful. And recently, after 45 years in the hospitality and seafood business, Jasper hung up his spurs. He hung up his apron and he retired. He now lives most of the year in Cape Cod with his wife Kathleen and his dog Buster. And I asked him what he was going to talk about tonight, and he said he's going to tell a story about a guest who came in and said, "How could you take my favorite dish off the menu?" How an irate customer became a best friend, and how they shared Thanksgiving dinner over the years, and how we did a memorable spoof regarding the meaning of the great American holiday. And he promises there will be a lot of food in this story. Thank you, Jasper.
This is an outrage. How could you do this to me? How could you take my favorite dish off the menu? What am I going to do now? That was 1980, and I had moved to Boston the year before and was manager at the Harvard Bookstore Cafe on Newbury Street. Yeah, that's a good idea. The irate customer was a guy named Andy Mose. I don't know if any of you remember Andy. And the dish was a dish that I learned from Lydia the year before. We worked at the Copley Plaza Hotel together. And it was a liver mousse that was flavored with caramelized onions, apples, butter, herbs, and cognac, right? Yeah, delicious dish. Andy really loved it. He was freaking out. I tried to calm him down, and I said, Andy, when I didn't really know him at the time, I'd seen him in the cafe a few times. You know, when a dish doesn't sell, you can't present it at its best quality, and so it has to come off the menu. But I'm going to make it as a special once in a while, and if you give me your phone number, I'll call you up when we have it. Well, all week long, I thought about this guy's, big belly, big beard, big, beautiful face with a smile that just reeked of mischievousness. And I thought about him, and I went in, made an order. Anyway, I made a 10-pound batch of the liver mousse. I packaged it in little containers. I called up Andy. I asked him where he lived. I got his address. He happened to be a neighbor. He lived a block away from me in Back Bay. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice of all nights. But anyway, long story short, we became best friends. We had a lot in common. We loved food. We loved drinking. We loved Beavis Bar. We used to hang out at the Elliott. I don't know if you remember that, before it became a real fancy place. And it was a great friendship. And at the same time, over the next few years, our careers paralleled. Andy, it's a whole nother story, but he went from being the traffic reporter to the co-host of the Joe and Andy show on ROR. It was one of the highest rating morning shows for more than a dozen years. And I got back with Lydia. We worked at the Parkers. We opened the Bostonian Hotel. And then I opened Jasper's. And Lydia and I were like becoming famous for new American cuisine. And when I got to Jasper's, I started focusing more on New England. And that led to a feature article in the New York Times with Craig Claiborne about Thanksgiving and my version of Fannie Farmer's turkey and a whole bunch of stuff and cooking tips for Thanksgiving. And Andy called me up and he said, Jasper, he said, I saw the article, that was great. Why don't you come on the show and talk about it? And I said, yeah, okay. So I knew, being Andy, that it wasn't going to be like really a serious food talk. So the next morning on the show, his partner, Joe Martell, says, "So, Andy, where are you going to have Thanksgiving this year?" And he said, "Well, I've got a bit of a dilemma. I'm supposed to go to my sister's in Connecticut with the whole family, but I just got an invitation from Jasper White to have dinner at his house." And Joe said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I don't know. Let me call my sister." And this is all on air. So he calls his sister Marla up, who was part of the spoof. And he said, "So Marla, how you doing?" "Oh, Andy, I'm so happy to hear from you. I hope you're going to be here for Thanksgiving." He said, "Well, I'm not sure yet. I might have to work. What are you having for dinner?" She said, "Oh, it's going to be wonderful, Andy. I'm making these little skewers of Spam and pineapple. I'm making a 5-cup salad. It's a cup of marshmallows, a cup of coconut, a cup of canned mandarin oranges, fruit cocktail, and imitation sour cream. And then instead of the regular turkey, I'm going to bake a turkey roll. And it's almost all white meat, and it's so easy to slice." And he's like, "Oh, great, sis. I'll get back to you." And he calls me up. "Hi, Jasper. What are you doing for Thanksgiving this year? Like, what's on the menu?" So I said, "Well, we're going to start with pemmican oysters from Maine. I'm going to broil some little neck clams and put garlic butter on it. A few other tasty appetizers. Then we're going to have a rich lobster bisque with tamale toast. Then we're going to have my version of Fannie Farmer's butter-basted turkey. And let's see, sausage apple and sage stuffing, cranberry ginger relish. Then I'm going to roast a piece of venison, Grand Vigneur with chestnut puree, and Brussels sprouts with bacon and sautéed chanterelles, and on and on and on." Next call to Marla. "Marla, I just found out I had to work." "I'm sorry, Andy. We're really gonna miss you." So most of the people that knew the show knew that he was a joker, but not everybody who heard it did. So the people started calling in, and they were irate. What a despicable human being. You know nothing about the meaning of Thanksgiving and family. One person even called him the Ebenezer Scrooge of Thanksgiving. Well, the truth is that Andy did work that Thanksgiving. And he worked almost every Thanksgiving and Christmas because he wanted his coworkers who had children to be able to enjoy it with their families. He had a big heart, and he was a great guy. And he did come to my house. I postponed the dinner till 4 o'clock so that he would come. And we shared many holidays together. And now I'm going to fast forward another 10 years. It's the year 2000. I had just opened Summer Shack 6 months earlier. And Andy said, "Come on the show, we'll do a little." He was a shameless promoter of his friends, as Lydia could tell you, and any other chefs who knew Andy. And in return, he would get free meals. But it was basically a 1-hour infomercial about Summer Shack. Well, I had a lot of fun doing the show with him. He went home that day and took a nap, and he died of a heart attack. It was so sad. It was so upsetting, and especially for his wife, Diane, who's here tonight with us. And for me, it was, I lost one of my best buddies, and it was so weird being on his last show. So I think of him often, and especially at Thanksgiving. Thanks, and I hope you guys have a good dinner this year.
Thank you, Jasper. That was so good, so wonderful. I want to welcome to the stage Celeste Croxton Tate. I heard Celeste tell this story about a year ago when we did an event over at the Podcast Garage. I found it so moving. When I decided to do this, I called her up and asked her if she would please do it. Celeste is a Roxbury native and the owner and CEO of Lyndigo Spice and Lyndigo Spice Catering. She just finished writing her first cookbook, her line of which, a shout out for her, no small achievement. And her line of chutneys and relishes, fruit spreads, and spice blends can be found in select Whole Foods, specialty food stores, and online. And the story she's going to tell tonight is about learning, sort of cooking through the pain and loss of her sister Rachel. Thank you, Celeste.
Hello. So I'm a Roxbury native. I grew up with my parents and 2 sisters. My dad didn't have a chance in hell in the house because it was all females. And my older sister Rachel, we were very close. She had the biggest smile and the deepest dimples that anyone could ever see. I used to get on her nerves all the time because she had to bring me everywhere with her. I was a middle child, so anybody who's a middle child, we're special, okay? And we did everything together. Like I said, she had to drag me everywhere with her, and she was just really special to me. I really missed her, and I remember my dad used to cook all the time. I really learned to cook from my father. Don't tell my mother that. But my dad used to cook all the time. And Rachel, she used to detest, pork and beans. He would do the canned beans, and we couldn't go to McDonald's or anything like that. My father was like, no, I'm making hamburgers. So he would, use so much black pepper. Remember the can of Durkee? Yeah. So he would be like this, and to the point where we would be coughing, eating our burgers. So when we were in the kitchen, where Rachel would sit was where we kept our recycle bags. So she would scrape her stuff in a bag, and we switch plates, and she scraped my stuff in a bag. But after a while, I think we did ourselves a disservice by doing that because he kept making them because our plates were clean. But yeah, so like I said, we were very close. And one day, on June 6, 1983, she didn't come home from work. And I was like, okay, well, where is she, And I'm like, okay, well, maybe she went on an adventure without me or something like that. And then we found out a couple of days later that she had been killed. She was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. She was a victim of domestic violence. And I just remember my mom just crying every night. And, it was just so sad. I became an introvert, and I just went into my own little shell. And I started reading cookbooks, magazines, watching cooking shows. And I remember every month Elle magazine would have a recipe card in their magazine. So I think what my mother did for me, she says, I got to help this child and my other sister through this, pain of losing, their older sister. So what she would do was, because she saw my interest in cooking, she would get the ingredients. I said, well, can you get this? I'll cook this. So she would get the ingredients, and then I would make that meal on Sundays. So now I'm 14 at the time, okay? So one recipe card was Cornish game hens stuffed with wild rice. And I made it, and my mother loved it. So she made me make this every Sunday. I swear it was for 6 months. I swear. And I'm like, but it was, but it helped me. It helped me. I started cooking. I came out of my shell, and, I just learned. And where we lived in Roxbury, it was everybody. It was all different cultures in our building. So I was learning how to make curry, Jamaican curry, Trinidadian curry, just everything. I was in everybody's kitchen, minding everybody else's business. But so I did that, and she stopped buying the ingredients. So I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe she's tired of me making it. And I think everybody else in the house was tired of me making it too, but it was really good. So later on, when I graduated from high school, went on with my life, went to college, and started my own family. And the next time I made this meal, I was pregnant. I had a 2-year-old as well. And I had the hens in the oven, and I had gotten into a heated argument, and I ended up getting slapped across the face. And the first thing that came to my mind, and the first thing that flashed in my mind, was my mother crying. And I said, my mother cannot lose another child to domestic violence. So I got out of that situation, and I became a police officer. So, of course, it didn't happen anymore. And I said, okay, so I did that, raised my sons, and, I started my catering company, and then my line of chutneys and everything. And I said, but you know what? I gotta revisit this recipe, because it's just, I don't know if it makes sense. I don't know. For me, it was like, sometimes you have to go back to move forward. And I said, I'm going to do this. So when I started journaling, because I had already started journaling when I was pregnant with my sons and everything, I started journaling and writing the recipes down, because I just would cook. And I started writing recipes down for my sons. And I said, well, I'm going to do the Cornish game hen recipe. I said, I have to do this for this cookbook. So I did. And I finished my cookbook maybe about a month ago. It was like almost 20 years in the making, but I've kind of enhanced it a little bit. I added my fennel and fig chutney to go with it. And it's just a huge accomplishment for me, and I know that my sister would be very proud of me. The name of my company is Lyndigo Spice. Lyndigo is a combination of two names. I said if I ever had a little girl, I would name her Indigo, but I had boys. And my sister's name is Rachel Lynn. So when I was trying to figure out a name for my company, I had all these stickies all over the table. My son, Victor, walks by, he has a big bowl of cereal. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm trying to figure out a name for the company, the catering company. This was back in 2006. And he looked, he said, just say Lyndigo. And that's what it is, Lyndigo Spice. So it's a combination. So, and I know every time I cook something, I know that my sister is with me, and I know that she knows I miss her very much. And, it's just, oh boy. I'm just happy to be here tonight, especially in the presence of all these chefs here. I'm like, oh my God, I was telling my husband, I'm like really nervous. He was like, you'll be fine. And I had my 50th birthday party at Davio's in April. So excellent service. But yeah, so that's my food story. Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay, we're going to take a little break and then come back for 3 more wonderful stories. Have something to drink, have something to eat. Take a look at our Let's Talk About Food brochures and see if you want to support us in some way. This is our first appeal as a nonprofit. If you like us, help us. Thank you. Everybody get something to eat and drink. Thanks to our speakers so far. To Steve, who was wonderful, to Jasper, to Celeste, Catherine. I'm going to take this second while we're getting all organized. And first of all, I want to thank the amazing team at City Space. Alex has been just so wonderful. The technical people who are doing all sorts of magic, it's just incredible. It's such a treat for me. And my own team, Rachel Caldwell, Rachel Gottbaum, Sherry McAdams, they've just been wonderful. And all of them are the friends and volunteers. Thank you so much, as well as our speakers. It's sort of a dream come true to be doing this. Because Ann Hood couldn't speak, and she is a really, really good storyteller, because I have read her books. It started this summer when I read her book, Kitchen Yarns, which is just an amazing memoir of her life told through recipes. What else? I invited her to speak, and she was so excited about coming, and last night found out that she couldn't. So I'm going to pinch hit, and I'm going to speak a little from the heart. And I'm going to talk about my mother, who was the anti-foodie. I grew up about 3 blocks from here, and from my bedroom window, I could block out the Citgo sign with my thumb. That's how close I lived. And I used to tell people that I grew up in the only non-food-focused Jewish family in America. That it's not a joke, until I read Ruth Reichel's book, and I realized that there were at least 2 of us. We used to tell everybody who had ever come to visit my mother's house, don't eat anything. Don't eat the cottage cheese with the blue scooped out of it. Don't eat the tomato paste, because it probably is still left over from the Depression when my grandfather shipped her a case. Don't eat anything there. So my mother really didn't care about food. And if she could have fed us Special K and chicken pot pies from her favorite Jewish butcher in Brookline Village, that would have been just fine. That would have been what she did. Thankfully, we did have a housekeeper who actually made sure there was real food on the table. But I had to wait until I was an adult to learn that lamb was not a gray meat. I was kind of shocked when I learned that. But my mom really didn't care about food. She was very, very busy and serious. She spent a lot of time listening to the radio. This is during the Fulbright hearing. She was an early China watcher. And occasionally when I'd be in the little school bus coming home from school, I would hear my mother calling into the talk radio stations. And I wanted to die. But that's who my mother was. She was really too serious, really food. Who cares about food? Whatever. Food is what you eat. She ate the same breakfast every day my whole life. Cottage cheese and rye crisp, black coffee and orange juice. That was it. I'm not a lot different, but I'll tell you about that another time. And my mother didn't really believe in what we eat, but she cared very much about how we ate. So the table at our house in Boston was beautiful. The china was beautiful. The water came out of these wonderful pewter pitchers. We never, ever would ever put a container on the table. That would have been, I don't know, God would strike us down, I think, if that happened. Not even a butter stick that was wrapped, nothing. And when we were growing up, there were 3 of us. My brother was the oldest, my sister was in the middle, and I was the baby. And it was kind of a formal yet boisterous affair to have dinner at the Kasdon household. My dad was an obstetrician and a gynecologist in private practice, so he often wouldn't be there through the whole meal. Somebody was always having a baby. I learned how to ask people about their contractions when I was about 8. So, but my brother, we were a very current events focused family, and my brother would run these current events quizzes for us at dinner. And it was the time we had weekly readers and all of that. And he would say, okay, who's the Secretary of Commerce? Okay, what's the capital of Iowa? And my sister just didn't buy into that, but my mother really did. And once he asked my sister, okay, I'll give you an easy one. Who's the Vice President of the United States? And she said, I don't know. Schlucky? Which was not true. It was Richard Nixon. That was the spoiler. And it was, every time we didn't know the answer to anything for the rest of our lives, we would always say, schlucky, like, it seemed like a good thing. And my brother was just that little bit mean, funny but mean. He was older by 6 years than me, so that he would say things and you would laugh and the milk would spurt out of your nose, not like his nose. And my mother, she thought it was fun. She held court and we held our own, I would say that. So, of course, to spite her, I got really interested in food. And I started watching this woman on TV, Julia Child, and I'd say, hey, Mom, come in and watch. There's this woman who could teach you how to cook. Which she didn't take kindly. But anyhow, I learned quite a bit. I learned that there was all this stuff that you could, cook. And I got one merit badge when I was not a Girl Scout, I was a campfire girl, for making a meal for my family. I made a meal, but that's all I'd ever cooked in my entire life. And then I got to college, and my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, his roommate was building a restaurant. It was called the Peasant Stock. And Mike was always hammering and doing all this other stuff, and I was holding the flashlight so that he could see where he was hammering. And I watched Jerry in the kitchen, who was a very good chef, and he'd be mixing up all this stuff, and I would say, what are you doing? He had this big glass, 5-gallon jug, and he said, I'm making salad dressing. And I said, stop. You can make salad dressing? Next I figured he was going to tell me you could make mayonnaise or ketchup. Who could do this kind of stuff? So anyhow, I learned from Jerry, and I became a pretty good cook, and I ended up, being the person whose house people wanted to come to for dinner. And later on in my life, I married my second husband, who was really into food. And he was really a good cook, and he was really into good cooks. In fact, he was very close to both, to all the chefs who spoke tonight, to Steve and to Jasper and to Lydia, and it was just a joy to learn about the professional side of the food business. And my mother kept thinking that this was ridiculous. Just ridiculous. And ultimately, my husband decided that what we needed in our lives was to open a restaurant. So we opened not one restaurant, not two, but 3. And suddenly we were in the restaurant business. That had not been my plan. I trained as an economist, not as a sous chef. But here we were, we had all these restaurants, and my mother would sort of poo-poo it, but she ended up really, really liking the restaurant ambiance. So she would come into our restaurant, and she'd be the hostess. She was 80 years old. And she would take people to their tables, and she really liked doing that, and she was kind of super fun. And she sort of got into that part of it. And then I decided the restaurant business was too much for me. I would rather write about the food business, which I did. And I did that very happily and successfully for a lot of years. I wrote about 400 million profiles of chefs in restaurants, and that was really fun. And I became more and more interested in food. And my mother would say, oh, you're such a good writer. Why don't you write about something important? Why don't you write about civil rights or, famine in China if you're going to write about it? Just write about something important. And this went on a bit. And I became a little defensive because I was having a certain amount of success and joy in my writing career, writing about food. And every year, my mother and I would hit our high point of difficulty around Thanksgiving. Because she had this big, beautiful house by the sea where we now live. And the entire family would come to this big, beautiful house by the sea. And every year she would say to me, oh, I could get it all catered by Costco. And I would say, no, I don't want you to get it catered by Costco. Well, I'll make the food in Cambridge. I'll bring it in. And she would say, yes, well, you have to get it all there on Tuesday morning because I'm not going to be worried on Thursday that the food... And I would do all of this. And partly I did it so that she would not stuff the turkey on Wednesday afternoon because she didn't believe all that bullshit about salmonella, She's just too much about everything, and maybe salmonella's good for you. The jury's out. She was really pretty much like that. So I would make all of this food, and I would sort of complain to everybody in my family about, poor me, I have to make all this food and schlep it in and all these hotel trays and all these fish tubs and stuff like that, because there were always 40 of us for Thanksgiving. And it would be fine. I would get there. We would only stuff the turkey in the morning before we put it in the oven. I was like, she did buy the croissants at Costco in the, I don't know how many are in those boxes, but like 4 dozen maybe. And they were just, I think, you just eat around the green parts, and every year we would have the same conversation. Oh, it's so much work for you. I'll just get it catered. And I'd say, no, it's a cooking holiday. I like to cook. Everybody else likes to cook. They like to bring dishes. So-and-so likes to bring soup or sweet potatoes or whatever the hell they were going to bring. And it only occurred to me after she died, which was now 5 years ago, at the ripe old age of 96 and in full control of her faculties and her food intake, that I had missed the whole point. I was really focused on the food. And my mother was focused on the people who ate the food. And the idea that this whole family came together every year, regardless of the food, regardless of whether we had chicken pot pie or Special K, nobody cared that the food was like the trees. The food was like the trees. It was the detail. The forest was the family. And now that I've had the opportunity to now move into her house and in my own small way move into her life, and we still have Thanksgiving, and I think, what a remarkable gift she taught me, that it's not about the food. The food should be great. If you can possibly make it great, let it be great. But what really matters is that people want to come. And that's what food does. Food brings us together. And I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And now I want to invite another great storyteller, one of my favorite people, Charles, although we refer to him as Chuck Draghi. I first met Chuck when he was working as a chef at Marcuccio's in the North End, and his food was sensational. It really was. And so was the locale. It was sort of vaguely mafiosi, except it turned out to actually be mafiosi. I think actually the owner or somebody else got killed in the space. So Chuck went on to consult for many more successful restaurants around Boston. He's really just been an incredible resource for many, many chefs in Boston. And he ultimately opened his own fabulous restaurant, Erbaluce. And every year, a round of applause for how wonderful Erbaluce was. Every year, I think it won the best Italian restaurant in Boston, which is no small feat. We got a lot of Italians here. And in addition to his being a chef, he's taking a little break from owning his own restaurant right now. But in addition to his always being a chef and having remarkable chef chops, he's also a playwright and a stand-up comedian. And tonight, Chuck is going to share a story straight from his family's ancestral home in Italy, how smelling lavender in his first professional kitchen job brought him straight back to Piemonte and the memories of his childhood. So, Chuck, come on up.
Just for the record, I don't know about anything that went on in the North End. But there are a couple places where you don't want to buy sausage. That's all I'm saying. That funny taste is not fennel. So it's a joke. It's a joke. Sort of. Anyway, I actually brought a chef's coat for this gig, but there is no way that I am wearing a chef's coat up here when titans like Jasper and Lydia are here. That's just, no. For the two of you that may not know this, Jasper and Lydia are such titans, such huge people in the restaurant business, that they're known by the names Jasper and Lydia. All right? Like Prince and Aretha. Just saying. Just saying. I go by Chuck, Charlie, Charles. I got a lot of names, but they got just the one, you know. And it's important, too. Just a sidebar. It's important to know who those titans are, because Boston has been a very important food town in this country for a long time. okay? I don't care what the Michelin guys are doing. There have been very important advances, and some of the best chefs in this country have been here. It's important to know who they are and what they've done for food in this country. So, I mean, of course, we're talking about Julia Child, and you see on TV, but there's a lot of very important. You need to know who Madeline Kamen was and who all these other great. We just lost a Titan in Monsef Medeb, who I worked for, who is great chef. So Google Boston chefs and read everything you can, and then try cooking. And that brings me back to, for me, not just for me, for everybody, but for me particularly, I think about scent and taste memory. Scent and taste memory are the most powerful ties we have to the past. They're far more powerful than sight or sound or tactile memory, which will diminish and lie to you over time. But scent and taste are like transporter beams. They will take you directly to a different time. So when I was a kid, every summer we would go to Piemonte. My family's from near Alba, if you know where that is, the truffle center. And we would go over there for a couple months every summer. Sounds like fun. It's beautiful there. It was really child labor. That's what they were poor. They were peasants, And so the village was my grandmother's village, stuck in the side of a cliff. And it was so compact, but it was a dairy town. So the cows lived on the first floor, people on the second, third floor, and the cows would heat the house in the winter, right? Because it just makes sense, saving money. Incidentally, now people don't have cows there anymore. It's kind of modernized. The village doesn't have a lot of people. And the little ramps the cows use to get up into the house are now paved, and they're the smallest driveways imaginable. I see photographs with like little Fiats, like kind of angular on the, so they're extremely small driveways now. But the thing is, when I think back to the scents, and anybody who's ever worked on a farm knows cow scents, but there are other aromas that are unbelievable. And a lot of it had to do with, we would, in the morning, go downstairs, milk the cows, bring the milk up, and my aunts would take the hay and the scum, whatever you want. There's got to be a better word than scum, but the stuff off the top. And they didn't have electricity then, and what they would do is they had these beautiful enameled stoves, which as chefs, we love those. The steel with the enamel, just beautiful little designs. And they would start the fire with dried grapevines and then little sticks. And they would pour milk into one pot and cream into another. And then for breakfast, we had these big bowls with hot milk, which, by the way, the milk there, I would come home, I couldn't eat for 2 weeks. Like, this is not milk that we have, right? There you could taste the wildflowers and the hay and the sun and everything. So you had this hot milk, and they put a little coffee, they put a little bit of cocoa, and then the little rolls from the day before, a little crusty, and you just have that, like a big cappuccino breakfast. It was just so good. And then you would leave, and it's still dark out, and you would leave with the cows, and you'd take them up the paths up into the mountains. And you could kind of see, because it was all these white pebbles on the paths, and you have these long sticks, and you try to keep them on the path. And as you go up, the younger cows are the ones that you need the sticks for, because they like to explore. Now, we're talking high alpine country here. So if a calf goes off the path, then you have to go down to the village below and explain why 1,500 pounds of hamburger came crashing through their roof. And you didn't want to do that. They're expensive. So anyways, you start climbing the mountains, and the younger cows will go to the lower meadows. And then you get to the top of the mountain, and just about the time that the sun was cresting, and the older cows, they all knew where they were going. Like, you didn't have to, they knew exactly where they were going. And they all had bells, and every farmer knew every tone of every bell. They all sounded the same to me, but they knew exactly where their cows were. And then they would take out these scythes and a strap, and these my uncles would start cutting all the wild grasses down, and it was mostly clover, right? But there was all this other stuff in there. Wild chamomile, wild herbs, thyme, all these different wonderful things, poppies, everything. They would start cutting it down. Cows like poppies. And they start cutting them down in these huge swaths. And then they would have these very large oxen bring carts and they put all that hay, what will be hay, into the carts, and they bring it out to the middle of the fields. And in certain fields, they would have these chivato, which are like little stone huts, and they look like a big rock phone booth. But you open it up, and it goes down like 30 feet. And they would throw all these grasses in there. And there was a little ladder in case you fell in, which you'll find out why later. But you throw it all in there, and then in the summer, all the hay and the grasses, it would like bake in the sun. It would get so hot. But what they were doing, they'd start fermenting, which was really good in the winter for the cow's digestion and all that. You want that fermented hay. They start fermenting. Well, now in the summertime, it's 100 degrees plus. And as kids, we'd go and we'd open up the door. It was like walking into a perfume counter. It was so overwhelming, the perfume. And of course, it's fermenting, so you get an alcohol hit, which is why you have the ladder, because some people, well, start rocking, and then you got to get out of there. But the perfume was unbelievable. And walking along the sides of the road, it was so hot, and there's all these wheat that escaped fields. There's old gnarly apple trees that nobody planted, so they probably went back to the Romans. And then, of course, while we were walking around, I was a kid, my father was always telling me, this is where Hannibal brought the elephants across. And we were kids, so, we're looking for elephant tracks and, and all the armor, we're looking for arrowheads, anything. We thought it was like last week. The kids have a little problem with perspective. But but it was a very heady kind of existence there. And it was wonderful. Many years later, I'm working in my first really great restaurant. It was called L'Americain. It was in Hartford. Phenomenal chef. Probably should have been in Boston or New York or someplace else. But he was from Colorado, and he liked the idea of cooking in a city where he could fly fish with his son in the morning and drive 20 minutes. And then as soon as he was done with work, go right back to some hills and streams, which I can't blame him for. But I was in this restaurant, and I was the only one who had no formal culinary training. Word is culinary, by the way. I have to use my English degree somewhere. But I had everybody else went to CIA or Johnson Wales, and so I had worked in some very good restaurants, but it was like they were speaking another language. I had no idea. And he was making this beautiful terrine venison, and he said, go in the back and get me the lavender flowers. I'm like, lavender? All I only know is lavender from soap. So I went back, opened up the jar. Unbelievable. I was in Italy again. It was like I left my body, because lavender was one of those smells that I knew from the fermentation that grew along the sides of the road. I found out later on that rosemary and lavender grow wild everywhere. And without knowing even what it was, I was not prepared. It was almost an out-of-body experience. And I learned to love to use lavender. I use it all the time now. And there's also other herbs that I smelled. Marjoram. The first time I smelled it, I'm like, oh my God, I know this from when I was a little kid. Without knowing it, you know it. And it was so powerful and so vivid that there's other senses that, you see something, oh yeah, I remember that. But it's faded. Its scent and taste does not really fade. So one other thing about lavender that I wanted to say is that different people have different experiences. Okay, so lavender I loved, and I started making all kinds of stuff with lavender. And I made this one mistake. I made lavender ice cream with a lavender swirl. And the chefs are probably like, oh, that sounds good, right? Lavender ice cream. Okay, when you buy herb de Provence, in Provence, there's lavender. When you buy herb de Provence in the United States or England or Ireland, there is not lavender. Okay, so this is the reason. Lavender is used in soap. And when kids are bad and they say bad words, you wash out their mouth with soap. So when you take the fat, like you have in ice cream, and you mix it with lavender, 8 out of 10 people loved it. 2 people called police on me. What are you doing? Ah! They're running, like their hair's on fire. Ah! And I'm like, okay, that's a pretty wide-ranging reaction. One person give me the recipe, the other one, you just try to kill me. And so it took me a while to figure that out. So not only is the scent and taste memory extremely powerful, but it can be a weapon. So you have to be careful about taking your experiences with scent and taste and aroma and things and matching it. Some people have a strong reaction to cilantro. Some people have a strong reaction. I know a lot of Italians have a strong reaction to oregano. But with them, it's more, that's Greek, that's not Italian. So you had an argument about, because, Italians are like that, right? Like my family is from Risotto Central. Like we're right where they grow the rice, right? And in our village, you're like, yeah, in the risotto, we put a little bit of onion. But over there, the house next to, I don't know what they do. They put garlic instead of the onion. I think that, it's Francesi. They're one doorstep to the west, but somehow they're French. And then, and then we put a little bit of milk, but we don't put the butter. That's the doorstep. They put the butter, they're Germania. It's like one doorstep to the east, they're German. So there's a lot of variation. And everybody has, and then within the same family and everything else. It's not just Italians, every ethnic family, you know that. You try to pass on family recipes, and like, wait, what are you doing there? Oh, nutmeg. Yeah, I never put nutmeg, and now you ruined Thanksgiving. But the thing is that, and this is where it's important, is that those things, you have in all these stores, you have aromatherapy and all these kinds of things. And it's sometimes, if you want to just have a wonderful experience, food obviously does that for you, but just the aromas. There's certain aromas. I remember working with my first Japanese chef, didn't understand a thing he said, but he made me cut perfect brunoise for so many hours that I had like mad knife skills. But he put lemongrass and everything. And sometimes now I just get a little bottle of lemongrass and just smell it, and it just reminds me of being a young chef, because I'm not. And, I want to remember that because it was fun. We all had fun when we were young chefs, and we're still having fun today. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
I'm about to introduce somebody else who needs no introduction, but I will anyhow. Lydia Shire, and it's true. I have met in my life one other Lydia, but she doesn't count. Lydia grew up down the street from here in Brookline, Massachusetts, and at age 4, she was peeling garlic with her father as he cut out recipes from the New York Times. In 1971, and it's a story she may or may not tell, she, by incredible energies, got herself to London's Cordon Bleu cooking school, and she came back to Boston as a line cook at Maison Robert, which in those days was the place, the fine French restaurant, probably the only fine French restaurant in Boston at that time. And just a few years later, she was the head chef. The James Beard Foundation awarded her in 1984 the Who's Who of Food and Beverage, and in 1986 she was asked to open the Four Seasons Hotel in Beverly Hills, California, and at that point she was the first female executive chef in the Four Seasons Hotel and Resort Company anywhere. A few years later, she came back to Boston, and I thank you for your official bio because I learned something. I never knew what Biba meant. I thought it was a friend of yours. But Biba, her restaurant in Boston, which just knocked everybody's socks off, was BIBA for Back in Boston Again. And in 1992, James Beard Foundation honored Lydia as America's best chef in the Northeast. The same year, Food and Wine reported that Shire was one of America's top 10 chefs. In 1996, the James Beard Foundation again acknowledged her, this time nominated as one of America's top 5 chefs. It's getting better and better. She launched her 6th culinary destination. Did I do it right, Jack? Culinary? Oh, good. Scampo in Boston's Liberty Hotel in 2008, and it was recognized by Esquire magazine as one of the best new restaurants. And this is my favorite part of it. Recently, she was named among the top 10 most badass women chefs in America by the Daily Mail. So I'd like you to welcome to the stage our local icon, the first of our first-name lady chefs, Lydia Shire.
Wow, that was very nice. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. By the way, Chuck, thank you for those nice things. And I hope you did notice that, oh my God, his name just escaped me. The owner of the first, Steve DiFilippo. Oh my God. I don't think he's here, thank God. No, but I hope you noticed that he wore clogs up on the stage. And you know, at the end of the day, you're right. He's a chef. He's a restaurant owner, but he's still a chef at heart. And there's a lot of great people here. You know that Diane Mose is here, Andy's wife. And Jasper, what you told today was so funny. You know, every single person was laughing just incredibly. It was so funny and well done. Thank you, Jasper. But I have my own funny story about Andy Mose, because when Jasper and I opened the Bostonian, Andy was, I would say, he was probably one of our very best customers. You know, big tipper, you know, huge tipper. He and Joe Martell would roll in as soon as their show was over. I don't know, it was over at 11 or whatever. So he'd be the first one in our private dining room, and we would literally have to kick him out, you know, at 6 o'clock. We had people coming in for dinner in the private dining room, and there was Joe and Andy with, you know, 5 cohorts, and they had opened a $480 bottle of port. And they were, you know, drinking a little there. You know, this was, you know. But anyway, so no question about it, we were great friends. And Andy knew that I was a major football nut, you know, as I still am. And, you know, football's the only thing that takes my mind off of work. I can just kind of watch a football game and nothing matters. So Andy, it was in 1985 when we were going to the Super Bowl to play Chicago, and he called me and he said, "So Lydia, what are you cooking? I mean, our team's going to the Super Bowl." And I said, "Well, I ordered some bear meat," and I did. I actually ordered some bear, and so he said, "Okay. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling you, you know, right away at 9 o'clock. Answer the phone." I said, "Okay, I will, Andy." So he did. He called me at 9. He said, "So Lydia, what are you doing for, you know, I know you're a football fan. What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you know, the Bostonians has ordered some bear meat, actual bear, and I'm going to cook, you know, whip this bear's ass and cook it, you know. I'm going to do a job on it." And he said, "Really?" He said, "Well, bear meat? I don't think I've ever tasted bear." So he said, "Well, what does bear taste like? Does it taste anything like beaver?" And, you know, I'm sure you've heard a few beaver jokes or so. I won't go any farther. But he made this whole thing about beaver and bear and, you know, I was a girl and whatever. So, but moving on, as Louisa said, I did grow up in Brookline. Both my parents were fashion illustrators. My mother worked at Filene's for many years, and she did all the fur ads. She was pretty famous for her drawing, you know, mink coats and she was amazing, though. My father, same. He worked at Kennedy's, and he did a lot of book illustration. And so I grew up in a home with 2 parents that were artists. And, you know, that was very important when I was growing up. In fact, I can tell you that, you know, my mother, when they lived on Babcock Street in Brookline, they were middle class. They weren't loaded. And when it came time for school, when you would get your new outfits, my mother would take me to Best and Company, and she would get me 1 or 1.5 outfits. And all my friends had 5 and 6 outfits, but they used to go to Zayre's or Bradley's. And so here I was, a kid with 1.5 outfits instead of the 5, but they were real cotton, no polyester. And to this day, that has made a difference in my life. I believe so strongly in quality, and that kind of rules my life. If I give customers the best in quality and I enjoy it myself, I think that's a happy marriage. So I grew up and I fell in love with a man, Tom Shire. I worked at, actually, I should tell this. I was a little bit of a bad girl in school, in high school, and I had to go and live in a foster home, which I did in Dorchester. And I had a job working at the Strand Theater as a candy girl, and I fell in love with the boss, the owner of the theater. And I was in my senior year at high school, and we got married, and I had 3 children right in a row. So I had 3 children by the age of 21. And at that point, we were living in Syracuse, and my husband no longer had the Strand Theater. He worked for a theater company, and he had a secretary. And one day he came home, and I was cooking dinner for his secretary and her husband, Bob. They had no children. And because I loved to cook, I was always cooking. That was my entertainment when I had 3 children. That's what I would do. That would, make me happy every day. I remember making my first veal stock. We talked about chicken stock, but, I remember my first veal stock. So anyway, I was at the supermarket. We had a babysitter for the 3 children, and I'm going up and down the aisles in the supermarket with my husband. I'm thinking about this dinner I'm cooking the next night. And my husband said, "Lydia, I have something to tell you." And I said, what? What? And I wasn't focusing at all. All I was thinking about was my grocery cart. And he said to me, "Well, I'm leaving you. I'm in love with Jenny. And just so you know, I have never loved you." So I said the only funny thing in my life. I'm not a funny person, but I did say something funny at this moment. I looked at him and I said, "Oh, does that mean dinner's off?" And that is the truth, because it was. So I had to go and put everything back in the, it was a crazy night. And that night he moved down to the couch, and that was it. And I moved to my mother's house the following May. This happened in December, January. And I lost weight. I'm sure there's someone out there in the room who's been through a bad marriage, and you try to lose weight in order to try to make yourself be more attractive. And that didn't work. Nothing worked. So I just knew in May it was over, and I came back, and I got a job at Paul's Mall, the jazz workshop, and I became a cocktail waitress at night. Because at the time, I didn't really know what alimony meant. Nobody had ever told me what that word meant. And my husband had lost his job because I don't think the company was very happy with him. And so he moved in with his parents in Medfield. And I had 2 jobs. I worked at Colton's in Harvard, on Harvard Street, actually in Beacon Street. And then I would go in at night. I'd go home and tan a little so I'd be pretty, because I'm so white Irish that, you need to have, with the short skirts that I had, I had to have tan legs. And so anyway, that's what I did. And I decided I wanted to work in a restaurant. So Maison Robert was opening, and I said, all right, I'm going to nail this job no matter what it takes, because I had no restaurant experience. So I had a book, Raymond Oliver, and it had a recipe for a 7-layer, very thin layer cake with buttercream frosting, and a real French buttercream frosting. So I thought I would go to my interview with a cake. And it was in the summer, and this was in 1971, 71, and I had to order an air-conditioned cab, and believe it or not, back then there were some, but not all. So I did. I ordered an air-conditioned cab, but of course when I made the buttercream, it curdled. I don't know who's made buttercream here before, but it's a tricky animal. And I curdled it, and I wasn't knowledgeable enough to put it back together again, so I had to go out and make the whole thing over again. Of course, now I know how to put it back together. But, these are the little trials and tribulations. So I made it there. The cake was beautiful. I walked into Maison Robert and handed it to Roger Martel, who is from Marseille in France. And he just looked at me and he said, yeah, you have the job. And, I think that should be a good lesson for many people. I think you have to, if there were young people here, I would say you have to stand out in some way. And I think it works. So anyway, I went to Maison Robert. It's then that I met Julia Child. And she would come into upstairs. I rose through the ranks, and I became the chef of Bonhomme Richard, the fancy dining room. Although I did skip when I went to London to cooking school. But that's boring. I won't tell you about that. But it was cool. I had to hawk my diamond ring in order to get $1,000 to go to London with. And I had $50 a week to live on there. And my rent was $9 in a YWCA. And every day I had free lunch at school. And for dinner, I would spend $3, and I would go to Indian restaurants, to Indian buffets. And believe me, the Indian food in London is so, so good. It's amazing. It's really good. So I came back, and Maison Robert gave me a job again, and I rose up the ranks, and Julia, would come in with Ben and Jane Thompson. They all lived in Cambridge there. Ben Thompson designed that beautiful design research building that we still have today. And she suggested that I go to the Harvest restaurant and be the chef. So she got me a job there. Basically, they hired me. And I went there, and I spent 9 months there, and I failed. It was the first job that I ever failed. And that was because I let 2 cooks there kind of get at me. They would make fun of me every day. They would say bad things. They would it was awful. And I wasn't strong enough to tell them, you're jerks, or and I was their boss, but I was weak. I was not strong enough. And one day I had it. They were, again, making fun, and, it was terrible. And I got in my boyfriend's car that day, and I said, I can't go back in there. I have to leave. I quit that day. But what happened that day is that never happened to me again. And honestly, it never has. I found a new voice in myself, and I became very, very strong. No more that I had to wait 3 months to tell Raphael Rosa he didn't brown the butter enough for calf's brains with brown butter. that's what long before, that's what happened to me. But now, no more. Now I found this voice, and to this day, it's not a problem. I simply tell people in a nice way if there's an issue, and they think about it, it's probably correct, and, we go on. But I suppose my message in this is that it's okay to fail. I mean, I surely did, but I kind of rose above that. So I did open the restaurant the hotel in Beverly Hills, and that was quite a job. I crashed my car, totaled it one night because I had worked 22 hours. The first month we were open there, we did almost $250,000 worth of banquet business. And I was getting up at 4 or 5, bringing donuts to my sous chef so I could get them out of bed. And, then I would get out at 12. And, that crash kind of woke me up again. But that was the moment when my brother, who was in commercial real estate, said, hey, you have to come back to Boston and see this space at the Heritage on the Garden. And so I did. I was coming home for Thanksgiving. I met Ron Drucker, and we signed a deal. And Biba was my first restaurant that I had ever opened. And I knew that I wanted it I knew that because it was in such a great location next to the Four Seasons, that I should have a menu that could cater to Europeans. And so I had an offal section on the menu, OFFAL. And that became very popular, and actually I would have to say I was probably the first chef in America to put an offal section on a menu. So I could have brains and kidneys and penises and whatever, It was interesting. And actually, about when I was going to, just before opening it, we had bar food, and bar food was non-existent in Boston. I think we had the first true bar food menu. And I wanted to make scallion pancakes because there was this little dive restaurant in Boston, in Chinatown, and they made the best scallion pancakes. So my Chinese friend made an appointment for me to visit the Chinese chef who was from northern China to get the recipe. And it was at 12 o'clock on whatever day. So I arrived at 12, and my friend, Bick, my girlfriend, wasn't there. So I knocked on the door, and he let me in. And, of course, I was just smiling because I couldn't converse with him. And right away, he came over to me, and he started putting his hands on me and trying to kiss me. And, I keep looking out the door to see if Bick has arrived, because I don't know what to do. This guy is pawing me. So finally, he's hugging me, and, and I look again for Bick. She's not there. So I say to myself, I have to make a decision. Do I want the recipe, or do I care if he feels me up? And, so I said, okay, I don't care. I want the recipe. So he was, feeling me up and, and kissing me, smothering me. And I'm just standing there waiting for Bick to come. Finally, she came, so I was saved, but just barely. So, I don't know. I really can honestly say there's so many funny stories. We all have them. But I love what I do. I'm very fortunate that my youngest son, Alex, has grown up with me making pizza. Like when Louisa said I was peeling garlic for my father when I was 4, that's exactly what my son has done. And, he's in the restaurant business. He is the chef, co-chef at Scampo. He's an amazing cook. I'd see he's even some leaps and bounds ahead of me in certain areas. And in other areas, I still, I kind of rule. But we have a great relationship. Scampo is better for it. And I just look forward to many years cooking, and especially cooking with him. This has been very fun. And thank you for listening.
I'd like all of our speakers for tonight who are still sort of recovering to just stand up and let everybody give them a round. Catherine, Jasper, Lydia, Celeste. So fun. And I want to thank the folks, the founders of Everybody Water, who brought this wonderful water. And they have a fabulous story, so find out about it. I want to again thank my team, because I can't do anything. I am very good at grand ideas and very bad at little things that make the grand ideas happen. Rachel Caldwell, Rachel Gottbun, Sherry McAdams, and super thank you to everybody at WBUR. This is a dream. I hope you've enjoyed it. Stay in touch with us. Visit the website. These stories will be up in a bit. We'll let you know if we have your email. We'll let you know. We will send you newsletters and let you know what's happening. And we look forward to doing this again and maybe having some of you in the audience share your stories, because everybody has a food story. Thank you so much. Thank you.